Good evening to both of you. We are coming off of a weekend where there was yet another mass shooting in this country. This one, of course, at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. So this question is about the gun issue in light of that. So for Mr. Edwards, many people are quick to say that guns are not the issue when it comes to these types of tragic events. At this point, though, why not try an approach where restrictions on firearms are imposed? Is there any one restriction, for instance, that you can point to that is not already in place that you would propose?
Well, John, thank you for the question. I greatly appreciate it. Let me start off by saying that the tragic events that have unfolded are staying on our country. People should never be targeted because of their race, their ethnicity, their gender. And what we've seen a couple of incidents like this in the past. We saw the synagogue shootings. We saw two African Americans, one shot in the back of the head, trying to walk into a store. Those are horrifying. But when it comes to government, restraining government, the Bill of Rights, I'm a big proponent of the 10th Amendment as well, because I think in New Hampshire we have reasonable gun laws. And our state's done a very good job because we have a culture here that respects human decency. I'm not interested in going to Washington, D.C. to have the federal government interfere in New Hampshire's business. And so I think the state's done a good job of working with our communities, our family and law enforcement community to address these issues. This is not a role for the federal government.
Thank you. And Mr. Pappas, how far are you willing to go with additional laws that limit firearm sales?
Well, thank you to Adam, to the panel, and to Mr. Edwards for being here tonight. We all have heavy hearts in seeing the situation that unfolded in Pittsburgh, which is all too common in this country. We're facing a uniquely American tragedy where we lost 32,000 individuals in this nation to gun violence last year. And while it's important that we offer our thoughts and prayers, and that can help people heal and bring communities together, we need more than just that. We need public policies that are going to allow us to protect public safety and plug the gaps that exist in the background check system. This is a difference between myself and my opponent. He wants to repeal the federal background check system. I believe that we need to strengthen it and make sure that we truly have universal checks for all gun purchases. That can help weapons falling into the wrong hands and help prevent tragedies like this in the future. I believe that we can respect the culture of responsible gun ownership that exists here in New Hampshire, while at the same time taking important steps to try to keep people safe.
Mr. Edwards, you were invoked there. You can have 30 seconds.
Thank you. Chris knows that's not true. I'm not in favor of the government illegally retaining the names of individuals in this country. I get very concerned when the federal government starts illegally retaining the names of individuals. I'm happy to look at reforming background checks, but not in such a way that we constantly violate the law. As I've said often, we restrain government. That's what the Bill of Rights does, and we hold citizens accountable. The Second Amendment, Chris, has nothing to do with hunting and collection. It is a right that's been established, not one that the government provides.
Mr. Edwards, and Mr. Pappas, you can respond.
I would just say this, that you checked a box saying that you want to repeal the Brady Law and get rid of the instant check system at the federal level. I think that's a dangerous policy that's going to make us less safe. We should plug the holes that exist in the background check system and work to preserve the Second Amendment rights of people here in New Hampshire while keeping people safe.
Mr. Edwards, you can have 15 seconds to respond, then we'll get to the next question.
Sure. Again, Chris is misstating my position because he's not interested in truly protecting citizens. We have reasonable gun laws here, and when the federal government is illegally retaining the names, he has not made one reference to that fact.
Okay, staying on this issue with Mr. DeSasso.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pappas, you are in favor of red flag laws, you've said, which allow police and family members to seek help from a court to remove guns from dangerous situations. What specific mental health conditions should be included in those laws, and how far should law enforcement be allowed to go in order to gather mental health information?
I think it's important to have this conversation about what steps we can take to address the tragedy of gun violence in this country. You know, I've met so many young people who are really determined not to let this issue slip from the headlines as it has so many times in the past. And I think there are proposals out there that we can take a look at to try to make sure that law enforcement and family members can intervene at a time when it's really clear that someone's going to do harm to themselves or to others around them. We've seen this in instances of gun violence in our country in the recent past, including some of the school shootings. And I think we've got to focus on how we have a stronger community-based mental health system to ensure that individuals don't get to a crisis point. but we also have to make sure that law enforcement and family members can respond in a responsible manner. So I would look forward to those conversations about how we could craft something that respects the rights of individuals while at the same time keeps people safe.
But are there specific instances or conditions that you feel should be included in these laws? And is there anything specific that you could point to?
Well, I think it's important to leave this up to family members and law enforcement to figure out exactly what a situation looks like and what kind of danger is presented to the individual, him or herself, or to the greater community. So I would look to those local voices in terms of how we set something up that could keep people safe.
Question to Mr. Edwards now.
Yes, Mr. Edwards, the questionnaires that had been posted on your website prior to the September primary, then removed. In those questionnaires, you opposed all prohibitions on ammunition, all background checks. You opposed federal gun-free zones, and you opposed prohibitions on silencers and suppressors. I guess if we started from scratch, where are the areas that you would like to see restrictions?
Well, first let me say, I'm the only candidate on this stage that's had the awesome responsibility of issuing a firearms permit to another citizen. I took my responsibility very seriously as a law enforcement leader. And I take safety very seriously. As a 16-year-old, the first time I ever had a gun pointed in my face, I was 16 years old getting off a city bus. This is an issue that is very concerning to me. But more concerning is how we do things like this. How do we make sure that our citizens' rights are protected without government infringement? So we have to do that in a responsible way. And I think the red flag legislation you just heard Chris talk about, there is no way of removing someone from the list. His response to your question is, let's let law enforcement and the community decide. You're running to be a legislator and you want to bring the federal government into the state of New Hampshire. That conversation needs to be had long before we start passing laws to determine how people are going to be taken off a list. He's so concerned about compiling lists, but not the mechanism to remove someone from a list.
Mr. Pappas, you've been invoked. You can have 30 seconds.
Well, I clearly trust local law enforcement, and I'm proud to stand in this campaign with the New Hampshire Troopers Association, with the Manchester Police Patrolmen. I know they do a great job at keeping our state safe and getting it right. And I think that we can work in a collaborative manner to make sure that we have laws on the books at the state and federal level to protect people, while at the same time protecting individual rights. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think that's going too far. And I think my opponent has a dangerous position that would make us less safe.
Okay.